When you picture the Industrial Revolution, what comes to mind? Do you see the smoke-filled skies suffocating the downtrodden groups that miserably march into workhouses 6 days a week, only to be overworked and underpaid? Moving through our daily lives, we generally don't think about where this work schedule came from and how protected we are at work in 2023. Like the men and women who tragically lost their lives in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911, many of us don't anticipate the dangers that may await us at work. Prior to this semester, I majored in anthropology, which aided in my research because I feel obligated to share the story of those no longer with us. They all deserve to be known as more than just lost souls. Moms, dads, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles, and grandparents. So many lives cut short throughout history, and while the Industrial Revolution encouraged growth, many lives were lost in the name of development. Today we discuss the conditions of New York City's factories leading up to what many considered to be the deadliest workplace disaster in New York City prior to 9/11. We will also discuss the outrage that this incident caused, as well as the community that banded together to change workplace conditions. A shirtwaist was the name for a new garment worn by the newly independent working class women in the late 19th century. It became a more practical option for those joining the workforce. While the Industrial Revolution began around 1760, the working conditions that young immigrants were hired into didn't improve much over the course of 150 years. The initial transition from manufacturing products by hand to using machines was very crucial to improving the trajectory of people's lives at the time. But it was the second Industrial Revolution that would encourage crucial innovations like steel production and electricity use. Isaac Harris and Max Blanc were both young Russian immigrants who got their start on the market by working entry-level positions in the garment industry. Their shared ambitious nature soon elevated their status in the business and would win them the nickname of New York City's Shirtwaist Kings. In 1900, the pair founded the Triangle Waist Company on Wooster Street, and for a time, the comfortable garment was new and exciting. Quickly growing the venture by 1902, the two men moved the operation to the topmost 3 floors of the Ash Building in Greenwich Village. The sewing floor layout was intentionally designed to keep conversations and distractions to a minimum, thus improving efficiency among the already neglected workers. By the end of the same decade, the business became so successful that Harris and Blanc were able to afford new homes overlooking the Hudson River with servants as well as chauffeured cars. By manufacturing the cheapest product on the market with a higher markup, the pair were able to retain the most of their profits. Unfortunately for the already poorly paid workers, this would mean longer hours, less breaks, and a secondary exit door being locked from the outside to prevent theft, while the only other exit would open inward. Unlike the smaller sweatshops that were commonly found, the two men smartly chose a more bright and modern factory design to try and increase the deliberately suffocated morale. This decision would unintentionally encourage staff to band together in times of dissatisfaction. The lack of respect for decent working conditions would lead to a short-lived strike among the garment workers, which lasted from 1909 to 1910. According to American Experience, PBS, that only ended when Harris and Blanc finally saw a declining profit. After agreeing to shorten hours slightly and increase pay, the strike led by the International Ladies Garment Workers Union came to an end, minus the highly demanded but ignored requests for a labor union. Now that we have looked at some of the concerning workhouse conditions that the Triangle Shirtwaist men and women encountered, let's look at the incident itself. According to the editors of History.com in their article called Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, which was posted December 2nd, 2009, their records alluding to insurance fraud many times over, spanning from 1902 to 1910 at the hands of the Shirtwaist Kings. The pair were very clearly against preventing fires and other accidents in case they needed to suddenly collect on the suspiciously purchased insurance policies again and again. Another reason the owners' methods and policies were under scrutiny was due to the lack of proper safety measures like rusted water hoses, a flimsy fire escape, a single elevator, and no sprinkler system. The Shirtwaist Kings were also accused of hiring ruffians to subdue insubordinate workers, as well as politicians and policemen to ignore their corruption. While there is speculation surrounding the initial cause of the fire, one thing is for certain. The lives of all 500 plus employees could have been saved. had there been precautionary measures in place, like outward swinging doors and sprinkler systems. The most likely cause of the fire was rumored to be a discarded cigarette butt or a match on the 8th floor, which, thanks to the copious amounts of yet to be discarded cotton and paper waste, quickly engulfed the upper floors. At this point in time, the seemingly advanced fire trucks could only reach as high as the 6th floor when the ladders were fully extended. While a foreman allegedly tried to douse the flames, these efforts were made no difference, as the fire hose was completely rotted with a rusted valve, making it impossible to even slow the flames. According to John E. Moser, who wrote 110 Years Ago Today, a disaster that inspired reforms, on March 25, 2021, the flames exploded shortly after 4:30 p.m. on March 25, 1911. Those on the 8th floor were the first to be alerted to the danger and promptly telephoned those on the 10th floor. Unfortunately, there was no audible alarm and no other way to reach employees on the 9th floor. The 146 laborers would only come to realize there was a fire when it had already reached them. Only one of the 4 elevators was operational at the time. The fire escape was flimsy and narrow, and the secondary exit was locked from the outside by the already fleeing foreman to dissuade theft and rest. These multiple factors meant that the single elevator would only successfully make 4 trips, holding 12 to 13 people at capacity before giving out, leading those rushing to get off the 9th floor to pile into the doorway and either jump down the shaft or try to slide down the cables. While some workers were able to survive the blaze by climbing onto the rooftops until taller ladders were located, many more were so afraid that they chose to jump from the windows to their deaths. By the end of the day, a total of 144 souls were lost, 2 more passing in the hospital. The accounts vary as far as the ages of the victims, the ratio of male to female victims, and the total number of casualties. Now that we have looked at the details of the disaster, we can discuss how the world responded to the mistreatment of employees following March 25, 1911, and the repercussions following such negligent business policies. After the fire, the bodies were taken to Charities Pier to be identified by friends and family. Some victims would remain nameless for several years, but thanks to avid historians, the few unnamed individuals were properly laid to rest with a marble slab memorializing the tragedy. By April 2nd, 1911, the National Women's Trade Union League, outraged by the crushing weight of lives lost, organized a meeting to discuss the precarious conditions that led to the devastating event. Within 3 days, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union would come together to coordinate a memorial procession honoring the men and women who lost their lives. The number of people in attendance was staggering. Picture 120,000 people marching in the rain while a crowd of 300,000 lined the streets to pay their respects. Max Blanc and Isaac Harris would soon be indicted and charged with manslaughter for the senseless deaths of their employees. Unfortunately for the families of the deceased, the pair would be acquitted of all charges by the end of the same year because the residing jury could not prove that Harris and Blanc knew of the locked doors at the time of the fire. Unsurprisingly, the corrupt pair settled their civil lawsuits several years later and gained a generous insurance policy totaling $60,000. Get this for the pair's revenue losses. The following year, the state of New York would finally pass a series of bills that were strongly proposed by the Factory Investigating Committee, which would cover conditions and dangers that affected laborers of all ages, backgrounds, and genders. By 1913, roughly 25 of the 28 proposed bills were passed, with harsher punishments for the violators. These bills included necessary improvements like fireproof stairways, better lighting, higher quality fire escapes, sprinkler systems, and wider doorways with outward swinging doors. Health and safety laws passed would also protect eating and toilet facilities. The Shirtwaist Kings operated the Triangle Company for just under one more decade after the fire, with several more alleged charges, specifically for locking factory doors again. The pair would only be required to pay small fines before being allowed to continue their corrupt business models as normal. By the end of 1914, the many civil suits were settled, and forced Harrison Blanc to pay out roughly $75 per life lost, though it remains unclear if the men ever repented for their selfish business choices. In conclusion, we have learned more about the precarious working conditions of the 1900s and what transpired March 25, 1911, and how the tragic event forever altered factory policies and standards. Even during the most grievous events throughout history, there have been committees created in the painful aftermath. Given the opportunity, people can band together for the greater good. It may feel impossible, but there's strength in numbers.